Welcome to Action 2020 Oakland School Board Candidate Forum for District 1, which represents North Oakland and adjoining districts. This is the third of 4 forums we will be hosting. The next will be for District 7, scheduled for next Saturday, July 25th at 2 p.m. We apologize for starting late. We did have 2 candidates scheduled to join us today. One of them had to drop out very last minute, and we'll be talking about that shortly. I'm Stacy Thomas, your host. As most are aware, Oakland schools have been facing serious challenges of school closures, budget cuts, policy issues, and a major influence and loss of students and real estate to this charter school movement. We at Action 2020 are a group of residents, parents, and teachers who are determined to see strong supporters of community public schools elected in Oakland this November. For more information about us, please visit action2020oakland.org. Other events and any schedule changes will be available on our website. The candidate for District 1 joining us today is Sam Davis, who is an OUSD parent, former teacher, and a volunteer with Faith in Action East Bay, former Oakland community organizations. He is currently working as an education analyst at the University of California. Asking questions on behalf of Action 2020 will be Clarence Hunt, an OUSD parent from Kaiser Elementary and a resident of District 1 in Oakland who is concerned about the school closures and the inequity in our Oakland public schools. We had originally intended to ask 7 questions of each candidate with audience follow-up. Given the fact that we have only 1 candidate today, we're going to limit it to 3 questions and no audience questions, but we will be scheduling a future District 1 where we have additional candidates, or so we assume. I will be turning it over now to Mr. Clarence Hunt. Clarence.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Clarence Hunt. And before I start the questions to candidate Sam Davis, I would like to notify the audience as to what happened today to one of our affiliate partners in Oakland, community organization and advocacy group. This particular organization had threats to their members, including one of the candidates that were running for the seat for District 1 Oakland School Board. And the organization was Zoom bombed and internet bombed by white supremacist organizations, threatening their members physically and verbally with threats of attack on them. And it posed a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety within our community, considering the fact that we're faced with racism at its core, not only in America generally, but in Oakland specifically right now. We're faced with significant racism, especially today in this environment that we're in. It's a significant problem when candidates in local organizations in Oakland are threatened by racist organizations and white supremacist groups that interfere with the constitutional rights that we have to freely express ourselves and advocate for issues that's so important to our families and to our children and to our community. So as a result of the threats that we were faced with today in Oakland by one of our associate organizations in their membership, we had to have an abbreviated version of our forum and candidate interviews today. So now is the time for all of us to step forward against racism and threats of coercion to silence our voices in this community. We cannot stand by and allow the voices of hatred and discrimination to stop us from moving forward in healing our community and solving those problems that historically existed and still exist in terms of systemic racism. So, and having said that, we would like to thank you for joining us today and in this abbreviated version of our candidate forum, which we will have an additional forum for D1 at some future date. So Sam Davis, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you and your participation, and would like to ask you a few questions in moving forward. COVID-19 is an emergency. OUSD recently announced that the new school year will start as virtual classes with no in-person, on-campus, teacher-led instruction. 50,000 students and 14,000 parents and caregivers need a clear path for quality education for our children. What's your suggested policy and plan to reopen schools in August?
Well, thank you, Clarence. And let me start by saying I'm really shaken and disturbed by the news. And I think it just demonstrates the enormous stakes of the election in November nationally. We just have this tremendous climate of racial hatred, this disease of this pandemic of white supremacy in this country. And so you have people at this moment who, faced with this historic health crisis, are instead taking refuge in actions of racism and white supremacy. I mean, it's just really disturbing to hear about that happening in Oakland, which we wish to be a sanctuary from that kind of ideology. So in terms of COVID-19, I think that the first step is, we know that right now schools aren't going to open. The virus numbers are climbing. We really need to address how to make distance learning more effective and less inequitable in our city. It was a disaster this spring. I think most teachers acknowledge that they wish they could have done a better job. It was a crisis. So we need to invest the resources and support to make distance learning more successful. And that means using the donation money or the federal money to make sure every student has a Chromebook, has Wi-Fi access, doing regular check-ins from the school on all students, following up, and that might mean hiring more staff. And so we should use those emergency response dollars to hire more school staff to address students who are not engaging in distance learning. And then once the pandemic ebbs, we do need to prioritize students of highest need for coming back to class, because they are the ones who are going to need to catch up the most. So those are, I think the last part is just demonstrating to our students, this is such a learning opportunity. How does our society respond to a crisis? And right now, just watching people walk around without masks, they're learning all the wrong lessons, right? So we need to be teaching them the right lessons of how our community can come together at this difficult time.
Thank you, Sam. I have a follow-up question to that initial question. In this COVID-19 crisis, what do you believe should be the prerequisites for safely reopening schools? And what safety policies, such as testing and contact tracing, should be in place when they do reopen?
That's a good question. I saw that the governor put out a guideline saying that, each classroom, if it's 5% of the classroom, meaning anybody in the classroom, basically, because the classes are going to be very small, if anyone in the classroom tests positive, then that classroom, quarantines. If 5% of the school tests positive, then the school quarantines. If it's 25%, I think, of the schools in a district, then that whole district has to shut down. So, there's guidelines now, finally, after much waiting from the governor as to what constitutes safety and not. I think there's also been a suggestion that it be 14 days of declining. It might take a long time for us to get down to zero, but 14 days of declining coronavirus cases before any students can come back in. So there's stronger guidance at this point from the state than a few weeks ago when the state was pushing districts to reopen irresponsibly. And so I think that's a more positive direction for us.
Thank you. Oakland has an enormous number of students in charter schools, approximately 14,000. What effects does this have, and what policies would you advocate for?
Yeah, so, I think the number of charter schools in Oakland has ballooned, and that's due in part to just so much advocacy from wealthy donors in previous school board races trying to advocate for more charter schools. Every child in every neighborhood, right, should have access to a good education, regardless of their zip code, their race, their economic status, their first language, if they have special needs. And yet what you see at some charter schools is that they are not serving students with special needs or newcomer students, like recent immigrant students, at the same rate that a lot of district schools are. And that's not to say that all charter schools are bad or evil or the people at them are bad. You know, I don't like getting into those value judgments because there's a lot of good families in those schools, a lot of good people working there. But the reality is that we have to hold them more accountable. So that looks like taking a real strong line when the charters come up for renewal as to, are they meeting basic standards for students with special needs? Do they have programs in place for newcomer students? Do they have teachers that serve students with moderate to severe special needs? Because as you get to the more severe special needs, the charter schools have even less services provided. And that puts an undue burden on the district. The district has taken the responsibility for serving proportionally more of those students. And so that is what has created an imbalance in Oakland Unified. And we need to take a stronger line with our charter schools in order to restore that balance so that there is fairness and equity for all our students.
Okay, thank you. A follow-up question to that one. How would you relate to the money spent on election campaigns by the charter industry? In other words, will you accept campaign contributions from the charter industry?
Yeah, I will not be accepting donations from any billionaires or any organizations that are taking that money from the billionaires and spending it here in Oakland. So very specifically, and that's because I believe that our elections should be about the voice of people at the school sites. And I think that's something that's been lost in Oakland in recent elections, is that families and teachers and school site staff are the ones who should be having the strongest voice. And yet what you see in the recent school elections is it's really, you know, Michael Bloomberg, a couple of other, you know, very wealthy donors who've had the loudest voice in our school board elections. So specifically, I reached out to Go Public Schools. They're having a forum on Tuesday. And I said, if you're planning to continue this practice of accepting donations from billionaires, then I don't want to seek your endorsement. And they responded that in that case, I should not participate in their forum on Tuesday. So I will not be participating, not because I offered to attend anyway, just to be part of the free exchange of ideas in the forum. But once I made clear that I was not seeking their endorsement for that reason, they said, well, in that case, you shouldn't participate. I do usually like to be part of any conversation with anybody. I appreciate you all putting on this forum today, especially in light of the difficult circumstances and still moving forward with an abbreviated version just to get information out. But I don't want to be part of this undermining of our democracy due to vast independent expenditures, which, you know, is from the Supreme Court case, Citizens United, and the Janus decision that the Supreme Court has kind of elevated the power of big money in elections and weakened the power of unions to engage in their voices. And I think that that's just backwards in the way that democracy should conduct its business.
Thank you. Racial justice for African Americans is gaining significant attention and support throughout California from most demographics. What racial justice initiatives do you endorse, and do you support reparations for African Americans?
I do support reparations. I'm not sure what that looks like in the school district context. I think in terms of the policies that I'm really looking at, I feel that our enrollment policies, including with charter schools, we need to be more equitable. We need to open up our schools so that they're more diverse, and so we don't have concentrations of students of highest need, whether it's homeless students, students, with special needs, newcomer students. We shouldn't be concentrating students at any one school. And you see in Oakland, you see concentrations of students with high needs. You also see concentrations of students with a certain amount of privilege, whether it's financial or just, social or racial. And I think we need to figure out how to make our schools more diverse, because that's better for everybody. And if there's anything we've learned from the pandemic, is that we're all connected and that we can't move forward as a society if some of us are being held back by prejudice. So I think when I was working on the Manzanita campus, where I was a teacher for many years, there was a group of African-American families and educators that came together as a Black Family Engagement Committee, and they worked together to develop policies that would improve the educational attainment of African-American students at the school, including such things as restorative justice, just intervention programs, all sorts of things, and just also having a voice, more of a voice on campus. And I think that is really important to support programs that increase the number of African-American educators on our campuses, because that's beneficial not only for African-American students, but for all students. I know that my son, having loving relationships with African-American adults who took care of him, who ran programs, who taught classes, it really showed him a different model of what his relationships could be. And I think that's true for everybody. So I think those are just some of the ideas I have, but I think I'm out of time.
I have a follow-up question to that one. How does reparations policies impact OUSD in your point of view?
That's an interesting question. I think that the way it looks is, again, I would love to see more empowerment of African-American staff and teachers at school sites, and for them to make those decisions of what kind of resources do they need to support students. I think that it's important to lift up that voice, and for them to have a space to have those discussions. I think, my experience working in the Fruitvale area was that parents of color, Latino and African-American parents had were very involved and felt confident in their space to speak up. And what I've noticed at District 1 schools is that due to gentrification, there's not as much space in those meetings as there should be. And so we need to create some dedicated space to encourage more of a voice from parents of color, both African-American, Latino, Latina, and all immigrant parents, to have more voice in how the schools are being run.
Okay. And one final question, Sam, before we, on this abbreviated version. What will you do about the fact that the state continues to have veto power over district decisions through the power of FIGMAT?
Well, I think, Oakland Unified has really struggled with its financial practices. And I think that it's gotten better under the current superintendent, right? It's not like it was under the previous superintendent, Antoine Wilson. I think that Dr. Johnson Trammell has put in much stronger policies around finances. I think there's a couple of new hires, which is Lisa Grant Dawson, who's the chief budget officer, and Preston Thomas, who's the chief of operations, that are willing to be more assertive and willing to be more communicative and transparent, I hope, with the community. But I think it's going to take a school board that's willing to push for those financial practices to get stronger, for the transparency and communication to get stronger, and for just generally being more assertive in relationship to the county. And I think in order for that to happen, it really has to be a school board that's willing to manage the superintendent, rather than what's currently in place, which is it feels more often like the superintendent is managing the school board. So we need to have very strong expectations. And like I said, I think she's doing a great job, but things just need to get better and better. And so we have to have strong expectations. And if a superintendent, be it Dr. Johnson Trammell or whoever, comes next, is not meeting our expectations, we need to be willing to take action, whether it's dismissing or reducing salary. But too often the current board has been just letting the superintendent make the calls out of fear of losing a superintendent, and that's not the way that things should be. It should be the superintendent being accountable to the school board. And I think as those practices get stronger, as stronger financial practices, more transparency, more accountability is put in place, I think you'll see the county and the state having less of a role because Oakland will have taken responsibility for its own finances. And that's crucial if we're going to see stability, a long-term budget in place, and teachers being able to predict what resources they will have in their classroom rather than these constant cycles of financial crisis.
As a follow-up question to that question, Sam, will you challenge FIGMAT's role and take action to regain full control of OUSD's financial destiny?
Well, I'm not sure, I think that involves advocacy at the state level. So I'm not afraid to go to the state level and advocate for what Oakland needs. I think what Oakland needs more than anything else is more financial support for education. California is 41st out of 50 states in education spending. That's why we need to pass Schools and Communities First. It's right over there, over my shoulder, and get more resources so that we can bring California, the wealthiest, such a wealthy nation state, and yet we are funding our schools so low. And I think once we have the resources to fund our schools adequately, then we won't be in a constant state of financial crisis if we have good practices. So I think that those are the steps that we need to take, and that's the advocacy we need to be taking at Sacramento. I'm not as familiar with FICMAT's role. Maybe once I get in there and I start seeing the powers behind the throne, then I'll come back and talk to you all. But I promise to be transparent about how the decisions are being made and what role anybody is playing and who's calling the shots. But I think that the school board ought to be calling the shots. It's our authority. I definitely was, got in contact with Assemblyman Bonta about that AB 1840 and making sure that, that language was taken out of there so they aren't requiring us to close schools. But I think our advocacy needs to be focused on getting more resources for our schools, because it's insane that in this country, in this state, we are 41st out of 50 in school funding.
This is the final question from my end. Being that you're running for an open seat, Director London is retiring. Can you explain to the audience some of your support base? Who are some of your supporters, organizations? Have you gotten endorsements from anyone, including Director London or anyone else, to give the audience an idea, at least at this juncture, 4 months out to the election or 5 months out to the election, where do you stand in terms of support, organizations, individuals? Where is your support coming from at this juncture?
Yeah, I'm proud to have endorsements from parents and at all of the, or not all, but most of the North Oakland public schools. And I've been endorsed by Director Shanti Gonzalez, Director Amy Ang, Director Rosie Torres. I've been endorsed by the former council member for District 1, Jane Bruner, the Alameda County Superintendent, Karen Monroe, let's see, who am I leaving out? Oh, I've not heard from Director London in a few months, so I don't know where, I've not gotten an endorsement from her. And I've been endorsed by SEIU Local 10-1 and the Northern California Carpenters Regional Council.
Thank you. Well, we have, this is an abbreviated version of what we were going to do, of course, and we have other questions that we have on board, but we're going to forego those today. But certainly we will invite you back to a more extended version of what we're going to do once we regroup in light of the circumstances. So would you like to make a closing statement?
Sure, thank you. And once again, I appreciate your flexibility and for organizing this. And I'm just really shocked by the news about the harassment of another candidate. That's just, it's something that should not stand in our society. And it really speaks to the challenge that we face and the crisis that our country is in at this moment. As you know, as you said in your introduction, I was a teacher in OUSD for 7 years. I've been involved as a dad in the school since my son was in kindergarten, and he's starting at Oakland Tech next month. I believe that families and teachers and staff are the ones that are most in touch with what their schools need. And that's why, as parents, we would go to school board meeting after school board meeting, advocating when the district was making budget cuts to protect school sites. That's why I've been in touch with parents and educators at all the North Oakland District 1 schools to understand the issues through their eyes and what they feel are the solutions to the dilemmas that we face. Working on the Manzanita campus, I just saw people pouring their hearts into supporting students at the schools. They were so proud of the miracles that they were doing, helping students overcome the obstacles of racism and economic deprivation. And yet they felt betrayed by district bureaucracy, dysfunction, and budget cuts. And so as the school board member, I feel like my first priority is, as I was saying earlier, a long-term stable budget, better financial practices so that we're not in these constant fiscal crises in Oakland Unified, and a more equitable enrollment plan so that we're not seeing concentrations of students with highest need at certain sites. And that includes, charter schools serving their share of students with special needs and newcomer students. And instead, we should make all of our schools diverse, because that's not only better for the students with high need, it's better for all of us. In diversity, there's strength. So once again, I want to really thank you all and appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sam. Stacy?
And that concludes our briefer than anticipated forum. The next forum will be with the candidates from District 7, planned for next Saturday, July 25th at 2 p.m. Please visit action2020oakland.org for links to all our forums. And while you are there, you can learn more about us and sign up for our email list. A recorded version of this forum will be posted in English and Spanish view soon. The District 5 and 3 forums are already posted. Thanks to our production team for setting this forum up. A big thank you to our candidate for his participation. And we thank you, the audience, for joining us. We will be scheduling another District 1 at a to be determined later date. So thank you very much, everyone.